At my birthday, I was going to announce my new career. Instead, my sister told me she was in love with my husband. Everyone watched. I smiled. A year later, she was alone, crying at my feet. Hey, read it? I'm Evelyn, 34F. I never thought I'd be the type to post here, but after everything that happened over the past year, I need to tell this story. Some of you might say I should have seen it coming. Maybe you're right. But when you grow up in a family like mine, you learn to overlook certain things. You get conditioned to let things slide, to keep the peace, to push down your own feelings for the sake of family. My younger sister, Natalie, 31F, never had to do that. Natalie was the golden child. She was beautiful, charming, and could wrap people around her finger with a well-timed smile. My parents doted on her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the steady one. If Natalie messed up, I was expected to help clean it up. If she needed money, I was supposed to pitch in. If she threw a tantrum, I was the one who had to back down. But I didn't resent her, not at first. That's just how things were. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Then I met Brad. Brad, 36M, was everything I wanted in a partner: kind, dependable, intelligent. He saw me in a way I wasn't used to being seen. With him, I didn't feel like an afterthought. We built a life together, brick by brick, and when we got married, I thought I was finally stepping into a life that was my own. But Natalie was always there. At first, it seemed harmless. She was excited to meet him, eager to be the fun sister-in-law. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, made playful comments about how lucky I was to have a man like him. I noticed how she'd touch his arm when she spoke, how she'd ask him personal questions that went beyond polite conversation. But I told myself I was overthinking. After all, Natalie had always been like that, intense, needy, a little too much. She wasn't trying to be disrespectful, right? But then, little things started adding up. She started calling Brad when she was upset instead of me. Whenever she had a new breakup, and there were many, she'd reach out to him for comfort. If we invited her over for dinner, she'd show up early, dressed like she was going on a date. She found excuses to touch him, a hand on his shoulder, a lingering hug, brushing imaginary lint off his sleeve. Brad, to his credit, never encouraged it. He was polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable. I should have put a stop to it sooner, but I was raised to keep the peace. My whole life had been about not making waves. So I swallowed my discomfort. Then came my birthday. By this point, I had spent years working a job that paid the bills but drained my soul. I had always wanted more for myself, and a year prior, I had finally taken the leap and started my own business. It had been a risk, but it paid off in ways I never imagined. My company was thriving, and I had planned to announce my success at my birthday dinner, surrounded by friends and family. It was supposed to be my moment. The restaurant was beautiful, the kind of place where the lighting was soft and warm, where the staff made you feel like you belonged. I had reserved a private room, invited everyone who mattered. The energy was light, celebratory. Even my parents, who had never truly understood my ambitions, seemed genuinely happy for me. Brad sat beside me, his hand resting on my knee under the table. I remember feeling this swell of pride in my work, in my marriage, in the life I had built. And then Natalie tapped her glass. A hush fell over the room. I turned to look at her, expecting another one of her dramatic announcements. Maybe she had a new job. Maybe she was moving. Maybe she was dating someone else. But then she looked at me, and then at Brad, and she said, "I have to be honest about something." I could already feel my stomach twisting. She exhaled shakily, as if she were the victim in all of this. Then, with a trembling voice, she said, "I love Brad." The room went silent. I didn't react, not right away. I just blinked at her, waiting for the punchline. But she wasn't joking. "I've been in love with him for years," she continued, voice thick with emotion. "And I can't pretend anymore." I heard my mother gasp. My father muttered something under his breath. Brad stiffened beside me, his grip on my knee tightening. Natalie's eyes were wide, almost pleading, like she was waiting for me to understand. Like she was expecting me to break down, to give her the dramatic reaction she wanted. Instead, I smiled. I saw the flicker of confusion in her expression. She had expected shock, maybe anger, maybe even tears. She had no idea. That moment was the beginning of her downfall. I let the silence stretch. Natalie stood there, her chest rising and falling like she had just confessed something noble, something brave. The entire room felt frozen, waiting for my reaction. My mother was already wide-eyed with concern, glancing between us like she might need to intervene. My father rubbed his temples, his patience for Natalie's theatrics wearing thin. But I didn't react, not the way she wanted me to. Instead, I reached for my wine glass, took a slow sip, and set it down carefully. Okay, I said. Just that. Nothing more. Natalie's lips parted slightly. She had expected tears, maybe an argument, maybe even me storming out. She thrived on drama, but I wasn't giving her any. She swallowed hard. Eve, did you hear me? She forced out a shaky laugh, like she thought I might not have understood. I love Brad. I can't hide it anymore. I tilted my head, watching her. Okay, I repeated. Brad finally moved beside me, shifting just enough for his knee to bump against mine. He hadn't said a word, but his entire body was tense. I could feel the way he was trying to contain his own shock, his own frustration. It was our friend Daniel who broke the silence. He let out an incredulous laugh, shaking his head as he leaned back in his chair. What the is this? He muttered. Some kind of rom-com gone wrong? That got a few nervous chuckles from the table, but Natalie didn't find it funny. She turned toward Brad, her hands trembling at her sides. Brad, she said, her voice raw. Please, say something. He stared at her like she was a stranger. What do you want me to say? That you feel it too, she whispered. That you see me. The hairs on my arms stood up. I glanced at Brad, not because I doubted him, but because I needed to see his face. And what I saw made my stomach settle. There was no hesitation, no guilt, just absolute disbelief. Natalie, he said slowly, his voice low and steady. I don't know what you think this is, but I love Evelyn. Evelyn, my wife. The way he said it, like he needed to remind her, made something inside me click. Natalie had convinced herself of something that wasn't real. I knew she had always been the kind of person who believed her own fantasies, but this was something different. Her face crumpled. You don't mean that, she whispered. I do, Brad said firmly. And I think you should sit down. That was when my mother decided to intervene. Natalie, honey, she said gently, reaching for her arm. Maybe we should. Natalie jerked away. No, I need to say this. She turned back to me, her eyes welling with tears. Eve, you don't understand. I held up a hand. Stop. She froze. I was still calm, my voice even. But something in my expression must have warned her, because she finally hesitated. I don't know what you thought was going to happen here, I said. But this isn't it. The tears spilled over. But no, my voice was sharper now. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You're in love with my husband? Okay. And what was supposed to happen next, Natalie? Were you expecting me to hand him over? Were you hoping he'd get up and confess his undying love for you in the middle of my birthday dinner? She swallowed hard, but she didn't answer, because she hadn't thought that far ahead. Natalie was used to getting what she wanted. She was used to throwing out whatever emotional bomb she had and letting everyone else scramble to put out the fire. Not this time. This time, I wasn't going to be the one scrambling. The tension in the room was unbearable. My mother was pale, my father still silent, and our friends were trying to figure out whether they should step in or stay quiet. Brad hadn't moved an inch, his jaw tight. And Natalie looked lost. Finally, she let out a soft, broken sound. I didn't mean for it to come out like this. I stared at her. Then how did you mean for it to come out? She opened her mouth, but no words came. That was the moment I realized something. She had planned to say this. She had planned to make some kind of grand confession. But she hadn't planned what would come after. She hadn't thought about what it would mean, what it would cost her. And it was about to cost her everything. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. We'll talk later. It wasn't a request. It was a promise. Natalie wiped at her tears, nodding shakily, and for the first time in her life, she actually looked afraid. The ride home was quiet. Brad drove, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other resting lightly on my knee. Normally, that touch would have comforted me, but tonight, I barely felt it. My mind was still at the restaurant, replaying every second of Natalie's performance. Because that's what it was, a performance. I didn't believe for one second that she had just blurted it out by accident. Natalie had always been theatrical, but tonight, she had planned this. Maybe she hadn't thought about the consequences. Maybe she truly believed she could just say it, and we'd all adjust our lives accordingly. But she knew what she was doing when she tapped that glass. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to make a scene, to wedge herself between Brad and me in the most public way possible. And worst of all, she thought she could win. Brad finally broke the silence. Eve, he said, voice careful. Are you okay? I blinked, realizing I had been staring out the window. I turned to look at him, and something in his expression made my stomach unclench just a little. He looked concerned, yes, but not guilty. Not hesitant. Not like a man who had been keeping a secret. That meant everything. I'm fine, I said, though my voice felt distant. Brad exhaled, drumming his fingers against the wheel. I don't even know where to start, he muttered. What the was that? Has she said anything to you before about? He cut himself off, shaking his head. No, that wouldn't even make sense. You would have told me. Of course I would have, I said immediately. Because that was the difference between Natalie and me. I told the truth. Natalie, she told stories. The moment we got home, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. Brad sat beside me, rubbing his hands over his face like he was trying to wake up from a nightmare. She's not going to stop, I murmured. Brad stiffened. What do you mean? I turned my head to look at him. She planned this. You know that, right? This wasn't some impulsive moment of honesty. She thought this through. She picked tonight. She picked an audience. She wanted to make me look weak. She wanted to make you. I hesitated, my stomach twisting. Brad clenched his jaw. She wanted me to look tempted. I nodded. That was the part that made my blood boil the most. Natalie hadn't just been trying to hurt me. She had been trying to plant a seed. She wanted people to wonder, to whisper, to look at Brad and me and think, maybe there's something there. She wanted me to feel paranoid. She wanted me to doubt my own husband. And that was why I was done playing nice. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mother. Mom, please don't overreact. She was just being emotional. Let's talk. I stared at my phone, then let out a humorless laugh. Of course my mother's first instinct was to smooth things over. Natalie could have slapped me across the face, and my mother still would have found a way to excuse it. She had always coddled her, always bent over backward to explain away her worst behavior. But not this time. This time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I didn't respond to my mother. Instead, I scrolled down and found Natalie's number. And then I called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice hesitant. Eve. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. My voice was calm, controlled. We need to talk. She hesitated. Okay. When? Now. A pause. Then a soft sniffle. I didn't sleep at all last night. I feel so horrible about everything, Eve. I didn't mean for it to come out that way. I said we need to talk. I cut in. Not that I need to hear your excuses. Silence. Then, finally, she said, fine. Come over. I hung up before she could say anything else. I had spent my whole life letting Natalie dictate how things went. Not this time. This time, she was going to listen. I arrived at Natalie's apartment 15 minutes later. She lived in a sleek, overpriced high-rise. One of those places that looked luxurious on the surface, but had paper-thin walls and neighbors who never made eye contact in the elevator. It suited her. Everything about Natalie had always been about appearances. I didn't bother knocking. She had buzzed me up already, and when I reached her door, I twisted the handle and walked in. She was sitting on the couch, legs curled under her, a blanket draped over her shoulders like she was the victim here. A barely touched cup of tea sat on the coffee table. She had even dimmed the lights, probably hoping to create some kind of somber, pitiful atmosphere. Natalie always knew how to set a scene. I shut the door behind me. Talk. She flinched at my tone, her fingers tightening around the blanket. Eve, please. I don't want to fight. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. You humiliated me in front of our family, in front of my friends. And now, you don't want to fight. Her lower lip trembled. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I tilted my head. Oh, then what was your goal? What exactly did you think was going to happen? Natalie swallowed, glancing away. And that's when I knew. She wasn't sorry. Not really. She was just upset that things hadn't gone her way. I took a slow step closer, lowering my voice. You were hoping he'd leave me, weren't you? Natalie's eyes snapped up to meet mine. You wanted him to hesitate. I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. You wanted him to consider it. To look at me and wonder if he had chosen the wrong sister. Her throat bobbed. I let out a breathless, humorless laugh. You actually thought you could steal my husband. Natalie flinched. And that's when the tears came. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, letting out the kind of heartbroken sob that had always made people rush to comfort her. The kind of sob that had worked when we were kids, when she'd get caught stealing my things or lying to our parents. But I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just watched. And when she realized I wasn't falling for it, she slowly lowered her hands, her face blotchy, her breath hitching. "Why do you always get everything?" she whispered. A chill ran down my spine. "What?" Natalie sniffled, her expression crumpling. "You always win, Eve. Always. You were the perfect daughter, the perfect student. And then you married Brad." I stared at her. "You don't deserve him," she continued, her voice thick with venom. "You've never had to fight for anything. Everything just falls into your lap. And then there's me, always in your shadow, always the screw-up, always the other daughter." For a moment, I just stood there, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then, slowly, I exhaled. "So this isn't about love?" I murmured. "It's about winning." Natalie's silence was all the confirmation I needed. She didn't love Brad. She wanted to take him from me. Because that's what she did. She took. She had spent her entire life trying to be the center of attention, trying to make sure that no matter what, she came out on top. And this was just her latest attempt. I let out a slow, quiet laugh. Natalie stiffened. "You really thought you could take my husband?" I said softly, shaking my head. She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. "Let me make something very clear to you," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Brad isn't interested in you. He never was. And after last night, he doesn't even pity you." Natalie flinched like I had struck her. I took another step forward, leaning in just slightly. "I am done letting you drag me into your little competitions. I am done pretending we are anything other than what we are." Her breath hitched. "You're not my sister, Natalie. You're just a woman who happens to share my blood." Her lips trembled. "Eve." I turned and walked out the door. I didn't look back. I had already given her the clarity she needed, though I doubted she'd truly absorb it. That wasn't for me to worry about anymore. For the next year, I had no contact with Natalie. I didn't call, didn't text, and didn't respond to any of her attempts to reach out. Brad, of course, was concerned at first. He knew how close we had been growing up, but after everything with her, I knew that this wasn't just about family. This was about her constant need to make everything a competition, one I wasn't willing to play anymore. Brad stood by me, and I appreciated that. He could see through her too, even if it took him longer to truly realize the depth of her manipulation. The tension at family gatherings was palpable. My mother would occasionally text me, asking if I'd forgiven her yet, or urging me to give Natalie a chance. I would just reply with a brief, "I'm fine." But the truth was, I was relieved. The constant drama was gone. Then, one afternoon, as I was getting ready to leave for work, the doorbell rang. It was early, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there she was, Natalie, standing on the doorstep with her hair a mess and her eyes red and puffy. Her posture was slumped, the confident, calculating air she always had replaced by something unrecognizable. She looked defeated. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there, waiting for her to say something. Eve, I'm sorry. Please, can we talk?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I crossed my arms. "What's this about, Natalie?" Her lip quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might break down again. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you. But I don't know what to do anymore. I've lost everything." I raised an eyebrow. "Everything?" I said, almost disbelieving. "You mean your career, your friends, your relationships? All the things you've torn apart because you couldn't stop competing?" She looked away, ashamed. "I ruined it all. I pushed people away, including Brad. He told me he couldn't do this anymore, that he didn't want to be part of this twisted triangle I created. I don't know how to fix it." I didn't know what to say for a moment. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. Part of me wanted to reach out and say it was okay. But then I remembered everything, her constant games, her manipulation, her deliberate attempts to tear me down. I took a deep breath and met her gaze. "I don't know what you expected from me, Natalie, but you were never going to take Brad from me. You thought you could destroy my life, but it didn't work. He's my husband, and you'll never come between us." She visibly winced at my words. "I know. I'm so sorry. I've made so many mistakes." Her voice cracked as she spoke, but I wasn't moved. I had spent years bending over backward for her, forgiving her for her selfishness, and I wasn't doing it anymore. I stared at her for a long, tense moment before speaking again. "You've been given more chances than anyone deserves. And now, here you are crying for the things you've lost because of your own actions. I shook my head, my voice cold. But no, I'm not here to fix you anymore, Natalie. This time, you're on your own. There was a long silence. Her eyes flickered with desperation, but I saw something in them I hadn't expected. Guilt. Real guilt. You'll never change, I added, turning to go. And maybe that's the saddest part. Before I could close the door, she spoke again. Eve, please. I don't have anyone left. I paused, hand on the door handle. But I didn't turn back around. That's the consequence of your choices. And with that, I shut the door behind me. As I sit here now, looking back on it all, I'm left wondering, am I the a-hole? Natalie's not part of my life anymore. I don't reach out to her, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. The entire ordeal was a wake-up call for me. I'd spent so much of my life trying to keep the peace, trying to make things work with her, but in the end, I was just enabling her toxic behavior. And honestly, I'm relieved it's over. But still, I find myself questioning whether I handled it the right way. Should I have been more compassionate? Should I have tried harder to fix our relationship? Or was this just the inevitable result of years of manipulation and rivalry? The revenge? It wasn't about making her pay. It was about finally setting boundaries. About saying, you've crossed the line, and now you can deal with the consequences. And in a way, that felt like the ultimate victory, letting her see how much she had destroyed, without lifting a finger to hurt her in return. What do you all think? Did I do the right thing? Or was I just as bad as she was?